Jesus, I surrender all to Him. I freely give. I will ever love and trust Him, in His presence daily live.
The 4th of January 1901, Volume 4. The unhappy state of a soul without God. After going through most bitter days of privation and of disturbance, I felt a mystical hell within me. Without Jesus, all my passions came out to the light, and each one casting its own darkness obscured me in such a way that I no longer knew where I was. How unhappy is the state of a soul without God! It is enough to say that without God, the soul, while still living, feels hell within her. Such was my state. I felt my soul tortured by infernal pains. Who can say what I went through? So as not to make it too long, I move on. Then this morning, having received communion as I was at the summit of my affliction, I felt our Lord move within me. In seeing his image, I wanted to look to see whether it was of wood or alive in flesh. I looked, and I saw it was the crucified, alive in flesh, who looking at me told me, "If my image within you were made of wood, the love would be only apparent, because only true and sincere love, united to mortification, makes me be reborn again, crucified in the heart of one who loves me." On seeing the Lord, I would have wanted to withdraw from his presence, so bad did I see myself. But he continued, saying, "Where do you want to go? I am light, and wherever you go, my light invests you everywhere." At the presence of Jesus, at his light, at his voice, my passions disappeared. I myself don't know where they went. I remained like a little girl, and I returned inside myself completely changed. May everything be for the glory of God and for the good of my soul. End of the reading. The 4th of January 1919, Volume 12, Effects of the Pains Suffered in the Will of God. Continuing in my usual state, I was all afflicted because of the privation of my sweet Jesus. However, I tried to remain united with him during the hours of the Passion. I was just at the hour of Jesus on the cross, when at the summit I felt him in my interior, joining his hands and saying with articulate voice, "My Father, accept the sacrifice of this daughter of mine, the pain that she feels because of my privation. Do you not see how she suffers? Pain makes her almost lifeless, deprived of me, to the extent that although hidden, I am forced to suffer together with her in order to give her strength, otherwise she would succumb. Oh, please, Father, accept it, united to the pain which I suffered on the cross, when I was abandoned even by you, and concede that the privation she feels of me be light, knowledge, divine life in other souls, and all that I myself pleaded with my abandonment." After he said this, he hid again. I felt as if petrified for the pain, and although crying, I said, "My life, Jesus, yes, give me souls. May the strongest bond that forces you to give them to me be the tormenting pain of your privation. May this pain run within your will, so that all may feel the touch of my pain, my incessant cry, and may surrender." Then around evening, blessed Jesus came for just a little and added, "Daughter and refuge of mine, what sweet harmony did your pain form today in my will? My will is in heaven, and since your pain was in my will, it harmonized in heaven, and with its cry it asked the sacrosanct Trinity for souls. And as my will was flowing in all the angels and saints, your pain asked them for souls, to the extent that all remained struck by your harmony, and together with your pain they all cried out before my majesty, souls, souls. My will flew in all creatures, and your pain touched all hearts, and cried out to all of them, be saved, be saved. My will centralized itself in you, and like a refulgent sun, it placed itself on guard for all, in order to convert them. See what great good, yet who takes the care to know the value, incalculable price of my volition. End of the reading. The 4th of January 1924, Volume 16. The words of Jesus in the garden, not my will but yours be done. In this way he established with his celestial Father the contract of the kingdom of the divine will upon earth. I was thinking about the words of Jesus in the garden when he said, Father, if it is possible, let this chalice pass from me, yet non mea voluntas sed tua fiat. Not my will but yours be done. And my sweet Jesus, moving in my interior, told me, my daughter, do you think it was for the chalice of my passion that I said to the Father, Father, if it is possible, let this chalice pass from me? Not at all. It was the chalice of the human will, which contained such bitterness and fullness of vice, that my human will, united to the divine, felt such repugnance, terror, and fright as to cry out, Father, if it is possible, let this chalice pass from me. How ugly it is, the human will without the divine will, which enclosed itself in each creature as within a chalice. There is no evil in the generations of which it is not the origin, the seed, the source. And in seeing myself covered with all these evils produced by the human will before the sanctity of my will, I felt like dying. And indeed I would have died if the divinity had not sustained me. But do you know why I added, and as many as 3 times, non mea voluntas sed tua fiat, not my will but yours be done? I felt upon myself all the wills of creatures united together, all their evils, and in the name of all I cried out to the Father, may the human will be done on earth no more but the divine. May the human will be banished and may yours reign. Therefore, from that moment, and I wanted to do this at the very beginning of my passion, because it was the thing which interested me the most, and the most important one, to call upon earth the fiat voluntas tua, on earth as it is in heaven. I myself said, in the name of all, non mea voluntas sed tua fiat. From that time I constituted the era of the fiat voluntas tua upon earth, and by saying it 3 times, in the first one I impetrated it, in the second I made it descend, and in the third I constituted it ruler and dominator. And in saying non mea voluntas sed tua fiat, I intended to empty the creatures of their wills and to fill them with the divine. Before dying, since I had only hours left, I wanted to negotiate with my celestial Father my prime purpose for which I came upon earth, that the divine will take its place of honour in the creature. This had been the first act of man, to withdraw from the supreme will, and therefore our first offence. All his other evils are in the secondary order. It is always my will to have primacy in all things. And even though the fruits of redemption could be seen before its effects, it was by virtue of this contract which I made with my divine Father that his fiat would come to reign upon earth, realizing the true purpose of the creation of man and the prime purpose for which I came upon earth, and that man could receive the fruits of redemption. Otherwise, my wisdom would have lacked order. If the origin of evil was his will, it was this will that I had to order and restore, reuniting divine will and human will. And even though the fruits of redemption could be seen first, this says nothing. My will is like a king who, though being first among all, arrives as last, being preceded for honour and decorum by his peoples, armies, ministers, princes, and the whole royal court. Therefore the fruits of redemption were needed first, so that the royal court, the peoples, the armies, and the ministers could be found worthy of the majesty of my will. But do you know who was the first one to cry out together with me? Non mea voluntas sed tua fiat? It was my little newborn of my will, my little daughter, who felt such repugnance and fright for her will as to cling to me, and trembling she cried out with me, Father, if it is possible, let this chalice pass from me. And crying she added with me, Non mea voluntas sed tua fiat. Ah, yes, you were together with me in that first contract with my celestial Father, because at least one creature was needed in order to validate this contract. Otherwise, to whom give it? To whom entrust it? And in order to render the custody of the contract safer, I gave you all the fruits of my passion as gift, lining them up around you like a formidable army, which while forming the royal court of my will, wages a fierce war against your will. Therefore, have courage in the state in which you find yourself. Dismiss the thought that I may leave you. It would go against my will, since I keep the contract of my will deposited in you. So be at peace. It is my will that tests you, and wants not only to purge you, but to destroy even the shadow of your will. So in all peace, continue your flight in my will, and be concerned with nothing. Your Jesus will do in such a way that everything which may happen inside and outside of you will make my will stand out even more, and will expand its boundaries in you, in your human will. I myself will maintain the rhythm in your interior in order to direct everything in you according to my will. I occupied myself with nothing else but the will of my Father, and since all things are in it, I occupied myself with everything. And if I taught a prayer, it was no other prayer than this, that the divine will be done on earth as it is in heaven. However, it was the prayer which enclosed everything. Therefore I did not move, if not around the supreme will. My words, my pains, my works, my heartbeats were filled with celestial will. So do I want you to do. You must go around it, so much as to let yourself be burned by the eternal breath of the fire of my will, in such a way as to lose any other knowledge and to do nothing else but my will, only and always. End of the reading. The 4th of January 1925, Volume 17. How all of heaven goes out to meet the soul who fuses herself in the divine will. How all want to place their acts in her, and the noble martyrdom of the soul is formed. Having completed my whole day, I was thinking to myself, what else is left for me to do? And in my interior I heard, you have to do the most important thing, your last act of fusing yourself in the divine will. So, according to my usual way, I started to fuse all my poor being in the supreme will, and as I was doing so, it seemed to me that the heavens were opening, and I went to meet the whole celestial court, and all of heaven came toward me. And my sweet Jesus told me, my daughter, fusing yourself in my will is the most solemn act, the greatest one, the most important of all your life. To fuse yourself in my will is to enter the sphere of eternity, embrace it, kiss it, and receive the deposit of the goods which the eternal will contains. Even more, as the soul fuses herself in the Supreme Volition, all go to meet her in order to communicate to her all the goods and the glory they have. The angels, the saints, the very divinity, they all communicate, knowing that they communicate in that same will in which everything is safe. Even more, in receiving these goods, the soul multiplies them through her acts in the divine will and gives back double glory and honour to the whole of heaven. Therefore, by fusing yourself in my will, you put heaven and earth in motion. It is a new feast for the whole heaven. And since to fuse oneself in my will is to love and to give, for each one and for all, without excluding anyone, in my goodness, so as not to be won over in love by the creature, I place in her, in my will, the goods of all and all the possible goods I contain within me. Nor can there be a lack of space in which to place all the goods, because my will is immense and is capable of receiving everything. If you knew what you do and what happens when you fuse yourself in my will, you would eagerly yearn to do it continuously. Afterwards, I was thinking about whether I had to write what is written above or not. I didn't see it as necessary or as an important thing, more so since obedience had given me no order to do it. And my sweet Jesus, moving in my interior, told me, "My daughter, how can it not be important to make it known that fusing oneself in my will is to live in it? The soul who fuses herself in my will receives, as though in deposit, all my divine and eternal goods. The very saints compete with each other in order to deposit their merits in the soul fused in my will, because they feel in her the glory, the power of my will, and feel glorified in a divine manner by the littleness of the creature. Listen, my daughter, to live in my will surpasses even martyrdom in merit. Martyrdom kills the body, but living in my will implies that the creature kills her own will with a divine hand, and it gives her the nobility of a divine martyrdom. And every time the soul decides to live in my will, my volition prepares the blow in order to kill the human will and forms the noble martyrdom of the soul. But in order to reach this happy state, the human will and the divine will must be tied together. One has to give the place to the other, and the human will must be content with remaining extinguished under the power of the divine will. Therefore, every time you dispose yourself to live in my volition, you dispose yourself to undergo the martyrdom of your will. Do you see, then, what it means to fuse oneself in my will? It is to be the continuous martyr of my supreme will. And you think it's trivial or not important? End of the reading.
To Jesus I surrender, humbly at his feet I bow. Worldly pleasures all forsaken, take me, Jesus, take me now. I surrender
The 4th of January 1927, Volume 20. How each new act of divine will carries a new divine life. How one who wants to hear the truth but does not want to execute it remains burned. Hardness of the divine will in the souls. My poor heart was now moaning, now agonizing, because of the pain of the privation of my dear and beloved Jesus. Hours seem to be centuries and nights interminable without him. Sleep runs away from my eyes. Could I at least sleep? My intense sorrow would fall asleep. Maybe this would bring me a little relief. But no. Instead of sleeping, I become all eyes, and open eyes, not closed. Eyes, my thoughts, which want to penetrate to see where is the one whom I look for and I do not find. Eyes, my hearing, to hear, who knows, the light treading of his steps, the sweet and gentle echo of his voice. My eyes look, who knows whether they may see at least the flash of his fleeting coming. Oh, how his privation costs me. Oh, how I long for his return. Now, while I was amid yearnings for him, my sweet Jesus moved in my interior and made himself seen inside of me, sitting at a little table of light, all occupied and intent on looking at the whole order of what he had manifested about his most holy will, whether everything was written, whether anything was missing, and the point he had to reach in order to complete everything that regards his most holy will. Everything which regarded his volition, the words, the knowledges, assumed the image of a ray of light in the hands of Jesus, which he ordered on that desk of light. And he was so engrossed and occupied that as much as I spoke and called him, he would not pay attention to me. So I kept silent, contenting myself with being near him and with looking at him. Then after a long silence he said to me, "My daughter, when it comes to things which regard my will, heaven and earth remain silent and reverent, to be spectators of a new act of this supreme will. Every new act of it brings to all one more divine life, one strength, one happiness, one enrapturing beauty. Therefore, the operating divine will that releases an act from itself is the greatest thing which can exist in heaven and on earth. New heavens, more beautiful suns, can come out of one more act of my will. Therefore, when it comes to it, you and I must put everything aside and occupy ourselves only with the eternal fiat. This is not about reordering a human will in you or just any virtue, but it is about reordering a divine and operating will. Therefore it takes very much. And this is why, being occupied with things which regard me more and which will bring the great good of a new act of this supreme will, I do not pay attention to your calls, because when it comes to doing the most, the minor things are put aside. After this, I was following my passionate Jesus in the Passion, and as I arrived at the point when Herod stormed him with questions and he remained silent, I thought to myself, if Jesus had spoken, maybe he would have converted. And Jesus, moving in my interior, told me, "My daughter, Herod did not question me in order to know the truth, but out of curiosity and to make a fool of me. And if I had answered, I would have made a fool of him, because when the will to know the truth and to execute it is missing, the humour, in order to receive the heat which the light of my truths bring with itself, is missing in the soul. Not finding the humidity in order to make the truths germinate and fecundate, this heat burns even more and makes the good it can produce wither. It happens as to the sun. When it does not find humidity on the plants, its heat serves to wither and burn away the life of the plants. But if it finds humidity, It makes prodigies. So the truth is beautiful, it is lovable, it is the reviver and the fecundator of souls. With its light and heat it forms prodigies of growth, of graces, and of sanctity. But for those who love to know it in order to execute it. On the other hand, for those who do not love to execute it, the truth mocks them rather than being mocked. In addition to this, while I was writing, I felt such exhaustion of strength that I did it with hardship. Nor did I feel I was being fed the words by Jesus to facilitate me, or the fullness of the mental light that forms in my mind like a sea, such that I have to content myself with taking a few drops of light to write them on paper. Otherwise, if I wanted to put everything, I would act like a person who goes into the sea and would want to hold all the water of the sea in his hand. As much as it takes, all of it escapes. But if he takes a few drops, he can manage to carry them with himself. So everything was hardship in me, in the body, in the soul, in everything. Feeling so bad, I thought to myself, maybe no longer it is will of God that I write, otherwise he would have helped me, like the other times. Instead, the struggle, the effort I have to make is so great that I cannot go on. Therefore, if Jesus does not want it, neither do I want it. But while I was thinking of this, my sweet Jesus came out from within my interior and said to me, "My daughter, one who must possess the kingdom of my will must not only do it and live in it, but she must feel and suffer that which my will feels and suffers within souls. What you feel is nothing other than the condition in which it finds itself in the creatures. With what hardship it flows, what efforts does it not have to make in order to subdue the creatures so that they may do its will? Keeping it repressed within their own will, they take away from it the best of its life within them, which is its energy, its joy, its strength. So it is forced to act under the pressure of a human will, which is melancholic, weak, and inconstant. Oh, in what a heavy, bitter, crushing nightmare the creatures keep my will. Do you not want then to take part in its pains? My daughter, you must be a key, and whatever sound my will wants to produce, you must be available to form the sound it wants to make. And when it has formed in you all the sounds it possesses, sounds of joy, of strength, of goodness, of sorrow, etc., its victory will be complete, having formed its kingdom in you. Therefore, think rather that this is a different and distinct sonata which it wants to play in you. It is one more key that it wants to add in your soul, because in the kingdom of the supreme fiat, it wants to find all the notes of the musical concert of the celestial fatherland, so that not even music may be missing in its kingdom. End of the reading. The 4th of January 1937, Volume 34. How every creature, even from the beginning of her existence, has an act wanted and decided of divine will, that creates her, raises her, forms her. Feast of Jesus in every act of the creature who does his will. I am in the arms of the divine fiat that surrounds me with its light and recalls over my poor existence its continuous act of his will, but an act that gives me life, that loves me, without which I would not be able to live, nor find the one who truly loves me. Therefore he wants me all intent to receive this act of life of his will, so that I would not expose it to not completing over me what he wants to do, or hinder his love, because will of God and love compete, the one cannot be without the other. Now, while I found myself under this act of the fiat, my beloved Jesus, with a goodness that I do not know how to say, all tenderness, clasped me to his divine heart and told me, "My blessed daughter, my will is everything for the creature. Without it she would not even have life. You must know that every creature has, even from the beginning of her existence, a wanted and decided act of my will that brings with itself an intense act of love toward he or she who begins life. See therefore how the creation of the creature begins under the empire of an act of love and of divine will, wanted with all the fullness of knowledge, so much so that these two acts, love and my will, are furnished with all the graces of power, wisdom, sanctity, and beauty, of which the creature will live and will complete her life. Now, as it formed its first wanted act, it does not move any more from over her. It creates her, it forms her, it raises her, it develops its operating act in order to reconfirm her in its wanted act. In fact, my will and my love run in order to reconfirm her in its wanted act. In fact, my will and my love run in every human act. They make themselves life, support, defense, refuge, and surrounding her with its power, they nourish this life. My love embraces her and holds her clasped to its bosom. My will surrounds her on all sides, more than dwelling, in order to keep safe its wanted act that my fiat pronounced, in order to call her to existence. Now this act, wanted by our fiat, is the greatest act, the most powerful, and that most glorifies our divine being, that not even the heavens can contain and understand. Does it seem little to you that our will runs in every act of the creature? And it tells them not with words but with deeds, "I am yours at your disposition. Oh, please recognize me. I am your life, your act. If you recognize me, you will give me your little reciprocation of love, and although little, I want it, I claim it, in order to reinvigorate myself from my continuous labor and from the life that I place for you. And my love, in order to not remain behind my fiat, feels the irresistible need of running to love every act of the creature, that says to her in her every act, I love you and you love me. Besides this, everything is in if this wanted act of my fiat becomes recognized. And then it makes of her unheard of prodigies of sanctity and of beauty that will form the most beautiful ornaments of the celestial fatherland, and the most refulgent lives that resemble their Creator, because our will does not know how to make beings that do not resemble us. The first thing that it puts forth is our likeness, because it wants to find itself in the operating act that it develops in the creature. Otherwise, it would say, she does not resemble me, therefore she does not belong to me. If then it is not recognized and not loved, then she forms the sorrow of my volition, although it runs in every act of the creature, and if it were not to run, it would take away life. So, in its sorrow, it feels its divine life rejected, the sanctity that it wants to develop hindered, the seas of grace that must inundate her, the beauty that must cover her, enclosed in its wanted act. Therefore my will can say, there is no sorrow similar to my sorrow. More so because there is no good that it did not want to give to her. There is no act of hers that I have not placed there of mine. So, my daughter, be attentive. Think that every act of yours is dependent on a divine will that envelops it, forms it, and gives it life. And because it loves you, it wants that you know the life that it gives you, and this as confirmation of its acts in you. Therefore content yourself with dying, rather than hindering this wanted, even from the beginning of your existence, act of my will. How beautiful it is to be able to say, I am will of God, because it has done everything in me. It has created me, it has formed me, and it will carry me in its arms of light into the celestial regions as victory and triumph of the omnipotent fiat and of his love. After this, my mind continued to swim in the sea of the fiat, and oh, how beautiful it was to see it, that it was attentive, such that as I breathed, palpitated love, so it invested my breath in order to form its divine breath, the divine heartbeat, and over my little love it formed its sea of love, and was delighted so much that with anxiety it waited for my little human acts in order to form its divine labour. And my beloved Jesus celebrated the triumph, the labour of the fiat in my little soul. And all goodness, he told me, daughter of my volition, how I enjoy in seeing that my divine will puts out of its own in the act of the creature. And since her act is little, she delights herself with losing it in its great act that has no limits, and as triumphant it says, I have conquered, the victory is mine. And I, in every act of her will in her, I make my feast. Now you must know that so much is the pleasure of our Supreme Being in seeing lost the little human act, lost and identified, as if it would have lost its life in order to give life to ours, that we elevate this act, that we call our act in the height of our eternal act. How much all eternity makes itself go around and surround this act, and everything that has been done and will be done in its round identifies with this act in a way that all eternity belongs to this act. This act leaves from the bosom of the Eternal One and forms one more feast for our Supreme Being. Therefore one more feast for the whole of heaven, and a help, strength and defence for the whole earth. The creature doing our will, to let her live in it, is the unique satisfaction that we experience. It is the true reciprocation that we receive because we have created creation. It is the contest of love between the Creator and the creature. It is moving us to give new surprises of graces, and she to receive them. Therefore, if the creature runs in our fiat, in order to give it the free field of action, in our emphasis of love we say, the creature pays us for everything that we have done. After all, did we not make all things and the creature herself, so that she would do our will in everything? She does this, and this is enough for us, even if she did nothing more. If this is enough for us, more so should it be enough for them, the doing, the living always in our will. With this she is ours, and we are all hers. And does it seem little to you to be able to say, God is mine, all mine, nor can he escape from me, because his omnipotent fiat holds him bound in me? End of the reading. There are no more readings today. Have a blessed day.